watching the Isaiah Factor Uncensored.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for the second half hour of The Factor Uncensored. Prosecutors have played all of its cards in the federal case against Diddy. For weeks, they have gone over intimate details, painting a picture involving sex, drugs, and power. Our next guest shares his expert analysis of the trial so far. And joining us on The Factor Uncensored, we have former prosecutor and current criminal defense attorney Bayoji Akingbula. Glad to have you here on The Factor Uncensored. The prosecution has rested its case in the Sean P. Diddy Combs case. Your thoughts about what they presented? Did they make their case? From my perspective, I was expecting a whole lot more, like sex with 4 dogs and 2 chickens, but when you say freak offs, I really expected some real freaking off, but it was tamed by some people's imagination. Your thoughts?
Yeah, certainly some of the testimony was salacious in nature. And so for someone who is not familiar with that lifestyle, which I believe is most of us, it may be very shocking to hear some of the details, especially with Cassie and Jane Doe, the second alleged victim in this case. I think when you look at the 5 different charges that the feds have to prove, 2 of them pertains to the transportation of prostitutes across state lines as it pertains to Cassie's freak-offs and Jane Doe's freak-offs. And I believe certainly there is substantial evidence that the federal prosecutors have presented concerning those 2 charges. Now, concerning the remaining 3 charges, and let's start with what I believe might be the most difficult as it pertains to Cassie and Jane Doe with respect to whether or not Sean Diddy Combs compelled them to engage in sex trafficking. It's really a matter of the juror's opinion. On one hand, they can look at from the federal prosecutor's perspective and believe that they were in fact compelled to engage in sex trafficking against their will. But I believe the defense attorneys through cross-examination particularly have raised some doubt there and have put into the juror's mind that this was between consenting adults, regardless of how salacious in nature the details of these freak-off parties were. This is something that Jane Doe and Cassie consented to. So I believe that might be a particularly difficult burden of proof to overcome as it pertains to those 2 charges. And that then lastly leaves the RICO case. Now, I believe with respect to RICO, the number one thing that the defense has going for them is that this is such an unprecedented way of operationalizing RICO allegations. We've seen historically, as it pertains to RICO charges, if you're talking about mob bosses, right? Like think Godfather, for instance, when you have a criminal enterprise that's in the background financing all of these criminal acts. Now, we've never seen it used this way before, or at the very least, this is something that's a modern application of this charge.
It's not desperation at all by federal prosecutors. It's just modern application instead of desperation to get him at any cost.
That's the defense's argument. I believe that they can say this is an overreach. This is desperation. This is just going after someone who happens to be a billionaire and going after crimes that they no longer are able to prosecute because of perhaps the statute of limitations. And they're now trying to circumvent that through this very, very novel application of the RICO charge. So the defense is going to have to define RICO in a way that favors them and convince and persuade the jury that RICO, as applied by the language of the federal statute, is not what we have here. And so I think there's an opportunity for them to overcome that charge. And they're going to need to, because how the federal prosecutors have presented this case is they've laid out a series of crimes: kidnapping, bribery, arson, and sex trafficking. And for each of those crimes that the jurors find Mr. Combs guilty of, it's going to compound his sentence. So I think they're really going to have to go after what is RICO and does it apply to a rich man such as Sean Diddy Combs, or is this a novel application that should not apply in a case such as this?
And how soon will the defense begin their case? Immediately, like tomorrow morning?
Well, yes. So the federal prosecutors have rested. My understanding is that the defense is not presenting any witnesses, or at the very least, is presenting very few witnesses. Certainly, from what I've been reading in different reports, Sean Combs is not going to be testifying. I also understand that they may, in lieu of presenting witnesses and live testimony, they may be presenting exhibits. So the defense's case is going to be very brief, if at that. We should expect the both sides to get into closing arguments no later than Thursday.
And of course, from what you have seen from the prosecution, what does your gut tell you? Will there be a guilt? Obviously, this will be left up to the jurors, but do you think there will be a guilty verdict at the end of this?
I think it's probably going to be split. If that's what my gut's telling me. I think again, when it comes to the transportation of prostitutes across state lines, I do think there's substantial evidence there. I'm very curious to see if the remaining three charges is going to be found guilty. You have to have a unanimous verdict on these charges. So if not split, we might even be seeing hung on some of these other charges. I would be very surprised if they're able to find him guilty on all five charges.
All right, we'll see, and we'll check back in with you when there's a verdict and see if your predictions were correct, sir. Always good to see you here on The Factor Uncensored.